recording, if that's all right. And so welcome. Just as a reminder, this is for 1.25 credit hours. And so the way this works is just engage when I ask you to and stay on the whole time. And then the way it works is basically after the webinar, I'll put in attendance and then I will click that you are attended. And basically it'll send you a survey. You have to fill out the survey. It's like 5 super simple questions. And once I've done that, I will also send a follow-up email with the resources as well. So you'll know that I've done that because you'll see a survey coming to you. And once you take that survey, you just go to your events and then go to completed and print your own certificate. We do not send them out. So just give me till tomorrow to put in your attendance and then we'll go from there. So this is our ADE webinar on effective discourse strategies for creating inclusive STEM classrooms. So my name's Rebecca Gorelli. I'm the science and STEM specialist, and Sarah's not here today, but that's all right. She is the science and STEM director. It is basically just 2 of us that work at the department in the science standards section. And so I am here to help you understand 2 things, mainly the research behind shifting instruction to make sure students are talking with one another rather than the teacher talking the entire time. And then what are some actual strategies you can try tomorrow in your classroom? So we're going to go through a bunch of different strategies, but we're going to start with the research first about our new standards and why we need to shift. So in the chat box, I did put a link. Make sure you have that open. Now that you know who I am, just take a minute, find that link, go ahead and click it, and then just type in your current position into the chat, just find the chat. And then how did you hear about this opportunity? We've been working on some marketing strategies and we just kind of want some feedback on how you heard about this experience. So take a moment, get comfortable in the chat, introduce yourself. I'm really honored to be here with you all. So thanks for taking the time to be here. And as you are writing in the chat, I'm just going to gently push us along because I know some of you might be taking the time to write. Go ahead and just read over the goals for this session. Oh, great. You're working on district as a district. Awesome. Welcome. Great. Thank you for introducing yourself in the chat. Saw it on ADE. Thank you. Oh, great. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. All right. So today's goals are basically, 1, we're going to talk a lot about academic discourse and what research says about discourse. And then, of course, we're going to learn those practical and effective ways to engage students in academic discourse. So before we get started, I did give you the link and I'll put it in the chat one more time, is that we build these resource pages for every time we do a professional learning experience. And it looks like there's only 6 things here. There is not, there are plenty more. So let me come on out and show you what this looks like. So here it is. At the top, you have our contact information. You've got the links to our main science standards page, which is where this recording will go once we're finished. We do have a whole slew of recorded webinars on there if you haven't been there in a while. You do have the slide deck right here. So if you're looking for the slides to this presentation, it's right here in number 1. And then every single resource I use to develop this experience is listed here in numerical order. On the slides, you will see, let me come back and I'll show you what it looks like. It looks like this. You'll see these dashboard circles here. What that means is on those slides, let's say you went to go look at the slides later, it'll have a number which correlates to the resource that it belongs to. So that way, you know, whatever's on the slide, there's a resource for that in the dashboard. So hopefully everyone has it. And we're going to start by just talking about the difference between information and knowledge. There are some misconceptions out there about how we get kids to actually gain knowledge rather than recall information. So information and knowledge are totally different things. We've got to come into this space when we talk about discourse with the mindset and understanding that these two things are not the same. And so what we mean is information is like this raw stuff, the stuff we give to kids that are building materials. So consider our old 2004 standards that basically just ask the kids to memorize isolated terms and facts. It was all about teaching science vocabulary, and that was it. And what we learned about the old approach to science is that doesn't help kids have conceptual understanding that they can apply for the rest of their lives. Because what we really want kids to know is not just information, not just memorizing vocabulary, recalling facts, filling in the blank, multiple choice. It is about turning those raw building materials into actual knowledge that they can use for the rest of their life. So we're talking about deep conceptual understanding here when we're talking about discourse. And so with that, I'd like to invite you to read over this meme real quick. And if you just joined us, I'm going to put a link in the chat that you're going to need. And so I want you to think about how many times you've actually heard educators out in the field say, well, I've taught it to them. I don't know why the kids don't know it. Well, that really comes with a deep reflection. It can't just be a surface level of, well, I taught it, why don't they know it? What we have to do is take a deeper look into the actual instructional strategies, the instructional practices that we use during facilitating instructional sequences that help the kids to not just recall facts in those low-level thinking, but really, how do they gain conceptual understanding that when they see phenomena in the real world, they can apply what they know for the rest of their lives? That's what we're talking about today. And so I'd like to introduce you to what we call the common patterns of classroom talk. And this is still the very top common pattern of talk throughout the nation. So I'm going to introduce you to something called the IRE talk pattern. You may have heard of it, maybe you haven't, but I guarantee all of us know what it is. So let me give you an example. Let's say I'm teaching and I say to the kids, who can raise their hand and tell me what the first planet closest to the sun is? And students raise their hand and I call on one kid and they respond, Mercury. And I say, thank you, well done. What I just did right there is called a cycle of IRE. And that means I initiated a conversation or a question. Students raise their hand. I call on one kid only. They respond and I evaluate whether they're right or wrong on the spot. What this does, and if you look at this talk pattern here, think about this cycle if it repeats over and over and over again, teacher to student. Teacher poses another question, one student answers. Maybe a teacher pulls out a stick or maybe spins a wheel and cold calls kids to another student. And look at this pattern. Who is doing the heavy lifting in this case? It's the teacher. This is what we call the IRE talk pattern. And this is what we need to move away from if we want kids to walk away with deep conceptual understanding. What this does, if you think about it, only one child gets to respond for about 1 second on average. So if I come to this pattern over here, teacher initiates, student responds, 1 second. And then we decide if that student is right or wrong and evaluate it on the spot. And then we repeat 1 second, 1 second, 1 second, 1 second. What this shows us, and this actually comes from this wonderful presentation out of the University of Washington, that this kind of talk is not going to help kids deep conceptually understand and be able to apply what they're learning to the real world. So this is what we call traditional style classroom talk. And with our new science standards that are three-dimensional based on contemporary research, we need to move away from traditional style talk. And if you're looking for a little more research, I did include for you number 2 in the resource dashboard, this STEM teaching tool number 6, which gives you the research behind why we need to move away from the IRE talk pattern, because it actually has unintended consequences. One of those is that the students believe that the answer is valued over thinking because of that E part of the IRE. Few students have a chance to participate. It's only those eager kids who really want to know the answer and they get 1 second to shine. But what do all the other kids do during that time? Only certain kids participate. This is inaccessible, inequitable for all students. And it actually encourages the very lowest level of thinking. We're talking DOK1, depth of knowledge 1, recall, memorization. That's it. So we've got to move away from the IRE because those unintended consequences are really, really pushing kids away from wanting to participate. So what do we do instead? Well, if you think of classroom talk as a spectrum, and on one side you have the IRE, the older traditional way of student talk, we've got to go to and progress towards the other side, which is called productive classroom talk. And we're going to talk about that a lot today. And so look at this model. Look at the interactions. Let's say I initiate a question and then I say, okay, have time to think by yourselves first. So I give them alone zone time where they commit to their own thinking first, then they share. So they can share in pairs, they can share in a group of 4. But what happens when we initiate and then allow for think time, for making thinking visible, we increase equity, we increase curiosity, we increase the ability of every student to participate. And then we increase the amount of class time students are talking to one another. So in order to do this, though, in order to make the switch, you've got to have clear goals and formats. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to introduce you to the best research out there called the Talk Science Primer. If you have not read this before, this is a fantastic document that is all about talk science, about how do we get kids to actually engage in academic discourse and what do teachers need to have in place in order for that to happen. So I did provide this resource for you, number 3 in the dashboard, but I've already done the resource for you. So we're going to talk about it. Inside the Talk Science Primer, what it talks about is, teachers, you have so much on your plates already. You do the heavy cognitive lifting when you plan and when you facilitate, that when it's time for kids to engage in the learning and we move through the science and engineering practices for talk, is that the kids need to do the heavy lifting, not you. So it is the kids' job to think critically. You've already done the heavy cognitive lifting. It is the kids' job to muster evidence. It is their job to challenge their peers and ask for evidence and for scientific reasoning. It is their job to ask questions of each other and integrate their thinking with others. It is also your job to help them learn how to judge the value of an idea, not the person putting it forward. And we are going to talk about this quite a bit today. And so there is still this kind of traditional mindset in administrator world, in people that coach other teachers, that there should be some quiet in the room. Well, sure, there should be quiet time in your science classroom, and that's when you give kids alone time to think by themselves first before sharing with a partner or sharing with a group. However, most of our classrooms, after alone zone time is over, should be very loud, because I want you to think of how you solve a problem as an adult. How many times do you say to your colleagues, hey, can I just throw an idea at you? Let me think aloud for a minute. Can I brainstorm with you? Can you just do some brain work with me? We have to provide those same opportunities for kids. Give them time to think by themselves first, and then talk it out with their classmates. They need time to think it out loud. commit to thinking on paper, thinking and talking at the same time with their peers. Because what we know is the more we let them talk and the more we ask them to commit to it on paper with making thinking visible, the more we can reveal about what their initial understandings are. That means we will have a touch point into their minds we can use as formative assessment to help drive the learning. And for kids to have a record of, I think this now, and then revisit later and say, I think I might want to change my mind based on the evidence I now know. So that record is really important of having them talk and think simultaneously with their peers. And so let's think about opportunities for talk with our new science standards from 2018. They're not really new anymore. All 8 of these are our science and engineering practices. This is through which we should be teaching the kids. This is through which the students should be engaging with phenomena and trying to figure it out. But the best part about each of these practices is if you have really good routines, they are all an opportunity for kids to talk, come to consensus, build ideas. And so you have to think, students are very new to these science and engineering practices. They are going to need time to understand how to engage in these. So we're going to have to start to think about, how do we get kids to engage in these and what does talk look like? But remember, this may be very new to them. And so it will take time for them to learn new talk patterns. And so I'm just going to keep going on the research here, because in this very valuable piece of research, there are 6 major outcomes that if you shift your instruction from the old school traditional style where you call on one kid at a time to productive talk, look at these 6 things and imagine what your class would look like. So I'm going to invite you to just read over these 6 goals. And just imagine the kind of classroom environment and community in which kids can interact in a low risk, comfortable way where they make their thinking visible, refine, challenge, negotiate, and critique each other. That is the ultimate goal of discourse in our classrooms. And so let's just continue on our journey. I'm going to show you an example of what talk might look like in a classroom. And so this video is on YouTube, and I did provide it for you, number 4 in the resource dashboard. This is a 2nd and 3rd grade ELL class, and basically they are learning about how water travels through different materials like gravel, sand, grass, rocks, etc. So what I'd like us to do is I'm going to show you this video. It's about 5 minutes long. And as you watch, remember that when we watch classroom videos, not to critique the teacher. It's not about what you would do or how you would do it differently. Let's look for how the kids are interacting and learning by talk. What does talk look like? How are the kids listening, explaining with evidence? How are they revising their thinking? How do they participate? And how are they connecting their ideas to the investigations and experience? So just give me a moment. Let me grab the video real quick.
Supporting talk. To engage in the practices of the NGSS, the science classroom must become discourse-rich. Sense-making to meet the 3-dimensional learning, and in particular, collaborative sense-making, calls for students to engage in talk, and the teacher needs to support that talk. This means major shifts for teachers.
We're finding out that kids, even like really little kids, have like wonderful ideas in science, and that if we stop and like sort of mine their experiences to get at those ideas, it can make science like really, really fun.
How does this look in a classroom?
Maybe there was snow on it.
Who heard what Yadira said? Put your thumb up if you heard what she said. Did you hear what Yadira said? Is there anyone who didn't hear? What about you? Did you hear what she said? Then ask her. Can you say that again?
Can you say that again? that when a girl or a guy drove something, maybe when they went back somewhere, the wheels that they were using had snow on them.
Take a look at the Three Spheres model from the Framework for K through 12 Science Education, written by the National Research Council. The framework is the document that has guided the development process of the NGSS. You see that the inquiry processes are driven by argument, critique, and analysis. These are accomplished in the classroom through social interactions with peers and the teacher.
I like really making the kids listen to each other at the RUG, and that has impacted me. And part and parcel of that was how we were not telling them that you are wrong and you are right.
The modifications in blue were made by Dr. Maria Simani, the executive director of the California Science Project and a professor in the Physics and Astronomy Department at the University of California, Riverside. The model shows how social interaction and dialogue is at the center of scientific practices. In other words, social interaction and dialogue drive inquiry and knowledge building in the classroom. The NGSS calls for science to be mediated by productive argumentation, use of evidence, collaboration, and analysis. This can be the most significant shift in practice for a teacher.
So everyone have a little conversation in your groups about what's going to happen when we pour water on the wood chips or the gravel or the concrete or the grass.
When you look at a classroom that is NGSS aligned, rather than a traditional classroom where the talk is initiated and dominated by the teacher, you notice a lot more discussion with students interacting with each other.
The grass is gonna get wet. Yeah, grass could, because grass needs water too, so it can grow. And then when it grows bigger, you cut it.
Ada, can you talk about how you know it's evidence?
I know it's evident because you can see water down there because it rains. The water goes in these two holes, and the holes lead down in the hole that puts water in.
How is talk supported in the classroom? How does the familiarity of the topic, student grouping, teacher responses, the use of home language, and pictures, videos, and real-world artifacts promote talk among students?
What color should we make the concrete?
Red.
But we used gray for the gravel.
Color piel.
Huh?
Color piel.
Yeah, do we have any color piel? We found some color piel crayones the other day.
The support of talk occurs in both small and large group.
Imagine you're pouring water on those wood chips. What's going to happen to the water?
It's gonna dry.
Right away?
Pour water in them. The color gets like a brownish
Where will the water go?
inside it.
Do you agree with what Rolando said?
They go inside of the wood chips.
Finally, talk is supported by carefully paying attention to partners and turns in talk, as well as keeping the discussion going by not referring to a right answer.
And instead of supplying them with the right or wrong answer, we're trying to get them to make those connections for themselves.
This was the most difficult transition for Melina.
We're saying, what are your ideas? And then we're seeing all of them as valuable, and we're helping the kids understand that those ideas are actually really wonderful and make a lot of sense.
With the NGSS, teachers are helping students be responsible for each other's ideas. This takes time, and Melina, like all teachers, is developing methods that reinforce the productive talk. What are some strategies you use to help your students listen and respond to each other?
All right, so we'll come on back now. X out of that, make sure that's gone. Oops. And That video is in number 4. Don't forget, and I did give you additional resources for videos. If you're looking for more videos, I added a few more resources in there. So you'll see in number 4, I gave you the argumentation toolkit videos. If you've never been on that website, it's dynamite. And then the BSCS video verse, which is from their Open SciEd curriculum. And so now that you've seen it, I want us to do a little chat together, maybe interact in the chat just a little bit, and consider what you saw in that video. And just reflect with your teacher hat and think about what routines or structures do you think that teacher had in place in order for productive talk to happen? Because it doesn't just happen overnight. What do you think happened prior to this experience in order to get her kids to talk that way? So I'll take a minute, find the chat, drop some ideas in the chat. What routines or structures? Make sure you have the chat on to everyone so everyone can see. Someone private messaged me that it can be done in an informal way. Yeah. Any other ideas? What might need to be in place to support this kind of talk? Engaging the students in the topic. Okay. Definitely. Hopefully they're engaging with phenomena, naturally occurring events in the world that we can observe. Safe environment where they can feel like they can talk and share. It needs to be set up by the teacher. Teacher acted as a bridge of the students in connecting one's answer to opening another. Yep. So did the teacher ever evaluate and say, you are correct or incorrect? Or did she continue to pivot the talk? Think about that. Was there any evidence of her saying yes or no? Or did she say, can you show me more? Did she use talk moves? Those are called talk moves. She never said whether or not they are right or wrong, because we know evaluating student ideas has unintended consequences. So let's talk a little bit more. I'm just going to gently push us forward in the presentation about what are the 4 major things educators need in their classrooms that comes right out of this research. Well, there's 4 things. The first is you need some sort of community norms or community shared agreements, buy-in from all the kids. Second thing you need are what we call dialogue protocols. How do we engage in discussion with one another? How do we use sentence frames like I agree with you or disagree? Show me evidence. Can you show me in your model what you mean by that? Carefully structured group is the 3rd component. And then finally, the 4th component is accountability, meaning what is everybody doing during this time to show what they know? Making thinking visible means we need to commit to our ideas on paper and show each other. So we're going to talk about each of these 4 things as we move along. Let's start with norms and shared agreements. I'd like to introduce you to one of the most popular set of norms that exists, and it's from the Open SciEd free open educational resource. I don't know who's familiar with this, but Open SciEd has a curriculum that is free, 3-dimensional, and is one of the leading curriculums right now that you can get these norms for free. Every single thing they build is open educational resource. So it's OER, meaning you can take it and you can use it. So I gave you in number 5, the set of classroom norms. So I'm going to invite you to just read over them here. If you can't see it on the screen, this is number 5 in your dashboard. It's right here, so you can go ahead and open it up. So I just want you to read over the norms. And then I want you to think about traditionally, I know when I was in, I'm a former middle school math, science, engineering teacher for a very long time. There were expectations from my administrators about making rules in the first week of school. And I kind of struggled with that personally, because to me, rules and expectations are different from how we build community in our classroom with how we share our ideas in science. And so I'd love for you to just drop an idea in the chat if you want to, or just reflect and consider, how does this set of norms differ from those traditional style expectations or rules we often still see in classrooms in that very first week of school? So think versus the system style at schools versus how do we talk to each other about science in our classroom, or STEM, or math, or whatever. And I think one thing that really resonates with me is we critique ideas, but not the people we are working with. Yes, and someone chimed in that the norms allow students to be more involved in their own learning. And what I also love is that it's we cannot learn without each other contributing to our big idea pile, because we're trying to figure out the phenomena together. Let's all talk about what we think, and we're open to changing our minds. Now there's no one right answer. Now I'm allowed to build a design and fail. Now I'm allowed to not know the answer right away. I'm allowed to learn, and I'm allowed to be free to work with people to build our ideas together. It completely changes the entire culture of your science community, or your STEM community, or math community. And so just consider, do you have norms like this in your classroom or at your district? Or are we still seeing kind of that older traditional style, these are the systems of the school for consequences and behavior? These are very different than that. So you need to have norms. So how do we get kids to start talking in a low risk way so that they be comfortable working within the framework of these norms? So I'll just tell you a quick little story. I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade here in West Phoenix in the Alhambra district. And when I engaged students with these kind of norms, it took time for them to learn new ways of talk. It wasn't like I just gave them these norms, we put it in the back of our science notebooks, and we went on our merry way. It took work, it took time. But you have to think about, if I'm going to ask kids to adhere to these norms, if we're all going to agree to it, how can I show them some low risk ways after I engage them with these norms to show them what I mean? So here is one really great way that I like to use with kids at the beginning of the year. And this is from Paige Keeley's Formative Assessment Probes. This is one of her probes. If you're not familiar, I did put a link in the dashboard. But what this is, the strategy here is called commit and toss. It is a low risk strategy. So how this works is, this is called a forced choice question. And it comes right out of Paige Keeley's probe book. She has like hundreds of these. And they're for probing for conceptual understanding and getting a touch upon your kids for formative assessment. What do the kids know before I begin any instructional sequence? So how this works is the kids read the prompt. So I'm going to ask you to read the probe real quick and think about which choice and why. And so this is called forced choice. And what this does is it asks the kids to pick the one that they agree with the most, because then you don't have any students who are going to go, I don't know. Well, you have to pick one. I'm forcing you to choose one of these that's resonating with your conceptual understanding at this point in time. So you ask the kids to commit. The commit part is that alone zone time. They need to think by themselves for like 2 minutes, and commit to their own thinking on paper first. So they put down increase, decrease, or stayed the same on top of a little piece of paper. And then they have to write the rule or reasoning, conceptual understanding. What do they think their brain is telling them about increase, decrease, or stayed the same? So here's how this works. You would give them a half sheet of paper. They would write increase, decrease, or stayed the same. And the rule, I think increase because, right? We need to get that conceptual understanding on paper. What do they think at this point in time? Make it visible. So then the students do not put their names on the paper. That's very important. This is low risk. I want every kid to participate. So they don't put names on it. All you should see is increased and then the rule or scientific reason why their brain thought that choice. And then when they're ready, they crumple the paper into the ball. So the first part is the commit. The second part, crumple it up. The third part is for X amount of seconds. I usually set a timer for 10 seconds. And I say for 10 seconds, the kids literally toss the ideas across the room, literally throwing them, having a good old time. At the end of 10 seconds, I would say, okay, pick up the closest paper to you. So they would pick up a paper, make sure everybody has one. They open it. They read what's on there. Because remember, we're not judging people. We are going to look at people's ideas. That's why it doesn't matter whose paper it is. Then I asked the kids, okay, if you had increased, go to this corner of the room. If the paper says decrease, go here. If it says stay the same, go here. And what happens as an educator when you engage them in a low risk strategy like this, and they start to separate throughout the class, is you immediately have a visual representation formatively of who knows what based on the prompt. So visually, you get the kids in corners and you can immediately say, okay, I've got a bunch of kids here. This tells me something, a bunch of kids here. This gives me information, and a bunch of kids here. Then what the kids do is they form little groups. Let's say you've got a group of 12 in one of these sections. Well, I asked them to make groups of 4, and then they open the papers and they read the ideas out loud. And why? Why does that matter? One, it's a way to get everybody's ideas out. It gets them up, it gets them moving, and it gets people listening to each other's ideas. Because the more we listen to each other, the more we might go, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. Or, whoa, that squares with my thinking. Oh, I feel good about myself now. It is very important that we build those idea piles together. And one great way to do that is through commit and toss. And so after they share the idea, they discuss it. Do we agree with it? Do we disagree? Why? And it turns into a little bit of argumentation. And that's it. Once everybody has a chance to share, you basically go and sit down, because it does 2 things. One, it's low risk, everybody participates, and you get a way for everyone to hear each other's ideas. Secondly, you have a very simple formative assessment visual tool of who knows what at the beginning of instruction that can help you decide what are you going to do next. So that is a very low risk strategy called commit and toss. I did give you a video of this from a 4th grade classroom in the dashboard, just to let you know it is here. But take a moment in the chat. When do you think you might be able to use this strategy in your classroom or in your district? And as you're thinking about it, when could I use commit and toss? This for me was at the beginning of instruction when I wanted to kind of get a temperature check on what my students knew or did not know formatively about the prompt, because that prompt went with what I was going to teach them. And so I'm just going to gently push us along. So if you have some ideas that you'd like to share, the chat is open, but I'm just going to keep moving us forward. So we talked about shared agreements and a very low risk strategy to show kids that it's okay to talk about ideas in our room, because that's what our norms set out to do. The second thing you need in your classroom in order to be successful at productive talk, not the old school way, IRE talk, is dialogue protocol. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with productive talk moves. If you teach math, this is the exact same as accountable talk moves in math. It is the same stuff from the same research. So if you'd like to take a look at the 9 talk moves, they are number 6 in your dashboard, and I'm going to go through them a little bit. Oh, actually, I think it's number 7. Here it is, productive talk moves checklist. I gave it to you. And it looks like this. This comes right from the talk science research. And let's look at goal number 1. The goal of these 3 talk moves is to help kids share, expand, and clarify their own thinking. So let's look at number 1, time to think. I cannot say how important this is. So I keep using the term alone zone, hoping that you would pick up on that, because that goes with talk move number 1. Whenever I engage them kids in anything, whether it's phenomena or looking at a model or a data set, I have to give them time to think by themselves first, commit to their own thinking before sharing with a friend. Because oftentimes teachers will engage the students in phenomena and then go turn and talk. And that has unintended consequences. You forgot to give the kids alone zone time first to commit to their own thinking and make their thinking visible first. So that is very much important. Second, I know we as adults use this all the time when we need someone to clarify. Can you say more about what you mean by that? Can you give me an example? What do you mean by that? So those are talk moves for you as the educator so that you don't say you are right or you are wrong. Can you say a little bit more about that? Tell me more about what you're thinking. And then the kid will go on, and then you say, so let me see if I've got it. Are you saying? And then you repeat to make sure the kid agrees or disagrees with you. So these are talk moves for you as the educator. Then in that video, you saw her asking kids if they heard the person talking or not. And kids are never going to say, hey, I didn't hear you. They're just going to sit there kind of quietly. So if you've got some kids who may not have heard, you can say, who can rephrase or repeat that? Or could you please say that again? What did your partner say? So again, these are just talk moves where you can pivot in a discussion and get at what you need the kids to do. Goal 3, helping students deepen their reasoning. You've got to be a finesser of a conversation. You've got to learn how to finesse and facilitate and pivot without giving away whether the kid is right or wrong. So if you're asking for evidence and reasoning, so why do you think that? Does it always work that way? What's your evidence? Can you show me in your model? How did you arrive at that conclusion? Without ever saying, you are wrong, you're in left field, you are right, great job. We pivot and we use moves instead. To challenge or counter example, I have sometimes when I facilitate PD, people are like, oh yeah, it always works that way. Well, let's talk about it. Does it work this way in this case or in this case? What if I change the dynamic? Think about it. And so we have to have moves to help challenge or counter example. And then these moves are definitely for both the teacher and the student. And I'm sure you've seen some kind of version of talk cards, which I did provide for you, but we'll talk about them later, is giving kids talk stems for agreeing, disagreeing, adding on. So talk move 7 is some stems for agreeing and disagreeing. Who can add on to that idea? Who can push it a little further? Who could add more evidence? And then who can explain what someone else says? So these are helpful for getting kids to think with others. These are what we call the 9 talk moves and the goals of talk moves. What I also provided for you is what we call the talk move map. And so I'm just going to show you this because I love this thing. It is in number 7. It gives you practical strategies for situations that may occur in the classroom. For example, let's look at the first one of my favorites. Let's say you pose an idea to the class, and then a student gives a response, and you're sitting there going, wait a minute, I have no idea what this kid said. What? It sounds great. And then you're kind of struggling in the moment. You're going, wait, I didn't understand that at all. So what move could I use? Can you say more about that? Can you give me an example of what you mean? So it'll buy you time, but also help the kid clarify what they mean. So this is a talk move map. What it does is it says, okay, here's a situation. What talk move can you use? So here's another one of my favorites up here. Let's say you pose a question and the kids' faces are blank and you've got only a couple kids. And you go, oh, they need more time to think. So you go, okay, I can see that you need more time to think. Why don't we stop and think or stop and jot for 60 seconds and get all those ideas out? Maybe I didn't give them enough time in the alone zone yet. Or commit to your thinking first for 30 seconds, then turn and talk to a partner. Something like that. So this is called the talk move map. And I just wanted to introduce it to you if you've never seen it before. That is really helpful for when something happens in a classroom. What move can you use in order to combat that and facilitate and finesse your way through a situation? So those are what we call dialogue protocols. So here's a second strategy that I'd like to introduce you to. Most folks are really familiar with notice and wonder charts these days. They're very popular because cognitive science say they work. And so I'm using an example from an NSTA Daily Do, the National Science Teachers Association. They have these great phenomena-based sense-making tasks that start off with a phenomena where the students observe an observable event that happens in the real world and they begin to ask questions about it. But before you have to get kids asking questions, ask them to make observations first. I see this, I see this. Then the think box is for prior knowledge. What do you think is going on? So this one is about ice melting. Just take a look at the phenomena. This would be at the beginning of instruction. And so you would continue to loop that video as the kids wrote observations by themselves in the alone zone first, by themselves for 2 minutes. Once they have their list, then you go small group. And then the strategy is one student reads all of their responses. And as the other kids are listening, you've got to make them accountable. So how do we do that? Well, you say, hey, as you hear something that you have in common with the person speaking, put a check mark on your list that says, yep, I got that. And then if you hear a new idea, you can add it to your list, but you've got to make sure you've got the evidence first. So if you need me to replay the video to gather evidence for a new idea, I'm happy to do that. So alone zone, then share. Then move on to think box. Alone zone. What do they already know about ice melting? And what do they think is causing that phenomena to happen? Why is the ice melting faster on the left than the right? This is one we do not share. This is formative assessment for me. As the educator, I come around and I look at the think box to gather information, and it's way too high risk for kids to share that because maybe not everyone has prior experience to draw upon. So that is a no share. Then we move on to wonder. Wonder is the practice of asking questions. So we ask questions about what do we need to know about the phenomena to help us figure out what's causing it to happen. What do we not know about the phenomena? And then the students share their questions in the small group, but you give them think time first. And so, those are the strategies. So if you're looking to use the See, Think, Wonder, I did provide a template for you with all the instructions written on it. What do? You engage them with phenomena, alone zone, sharing, all the things I just talked about. You've got all the directions. It's number 8 in your dashboard. So now that we've talked about dialogue protocols, having kids have structures, let's talk about carefully structured groups. So in this wonderful piece of research, there are multiple ways to group students. So let's talk about them because they all have different purposes. First and foremost, there's a variety of group formats. We got partner talk, small group work, whole class discussion. But before I ask kids to talk, I want you to think about the theme of this webinar. You must give them time to think by themselves first, to make their own thinking visible before partners, before small groups, before whole class. Then you have to consider how much time you are allowing for kids to talk, because this is how kids learn. We know from research that kids need time to talk. So we've got to slow it down. They need time to ask questions. They need time to build their ideas together and co-construct meaning with their peers. That means we're adding our ideas together so that we collectively come to consensus and figure out what's causing the phenomena to happen. So the first kind is partner talk. So I'm just going to invite you to read over the purpose and then what do the teachers do. So just invite you to read over this for a minute. And so what's really important is this word right here. When I ask kids to go to the alone zone first, to think by themselves before sharing, that means every kid will then have something to share. And then when they share with a partner, we're just exploring our ideas. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong. What do you think? What do I think? Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that. It's just for exploring. Partner talk is very low stakes entry point for students. It allows for them to hear the other person and be heard. And guess what? You will get 100% participation as every single person is listening, thinking, and preparing to share their ideas. That's why the alone zone is so important. You want equity in the classroom? Give kids all the time they need to think by themselves first. Partner talk always also prepares them to engage in a small group next. They've already had a chance to share with one other person. They're feeling pretty okay. They're feeling empowered. It's low risk. Now I feel ready to share. So what's the next kind of format? Small group work. So I'm going to invite you to read over the structure and purpose and the role of the teacher in this style of talk. So this one has three major goals. One, like partner talk, small group work can feel very safe and lower stakes to students. Secondly, this style of talk format allows more talk time for individual students than if I went whole class. So remember, our goal is to increase the percentage of talk time in class. It also, if you're going to go whole group next, prepares the students to engage in rigorous and confident whole class discussions, which is where that fear comes in for kids. So let's keep going. Yes, we should have whole group discussion, but in research and with our new science standards, it has a very different purpose than what you think. So let's get into the structure and purpose and what the role of the teachers is. So this is what we call sense-making circles. When we've gotten to a point in instruction where maybe different groups have their models ready to go, their models and their explanations. And now we might want to do a quick gallery walk and look where we have ideas that are the same or different, because the goal is to come to a whole class consensus model where we build all of our ideas together and come into agreement on what needs to go in the model, what needs to go in the explanation. This is about sense making, helping the kids with deep conceptual understanding and not telling them whether they are right or wrong. This is open for argumentation. What do we think about what this group is claiming? What do we think about this group's claim? And it opens it up for reasoning and discussion. So those are the carefully structured groups that should come at very intentional times in an instructional sequence. And then finally, accountability. The students need to be making their thinking visible on posters, on maps, on, structured graphic organizers or in their notebooks, somewhere to commit to their own thinking. So let's talk about another strategy. This is called a structured think, pair, share. I know many of us who have been teaching for a long time are very used to think, pair, share. Well, this is a different take on a think, pair, share. And it happens to include that time to commit to their own thinking first. So this strategy is called a structured think, pair, share. And so I grabbed another NSTA Daily Do phenomena-based sense-making tasks that are, many of them are free. And take a look at this picture. There's a video that goes with this lesson where you basically fill a glass with water and put a piece of paper or a card, and then you flip it. But the water still stays in the glass. So I would use this as an introduction to a phenomena at the beginning of an instructional sequence. And what it is it's a paper I give to the kids, or I ask them to make these boxes in their notebook about why is the water still in the glass. So what happens first is in the one box, you give them 2 minutes to commit to their own thinking first, alone zone time. Then when we pair, it's just with another person. This is a 2-person pair. So each person will share their ideas, but the accountability aspect, which is what we're talking about here, is as I listen, I'm writing down my partner's ideas. And then we switch so that I am heard and I feel heard. I can hear and I feel heard. So then you give them about 3 minutes to do that. And then the share has a different purpose. The share is about coming to common understanding and sharing where they have consensus. A big thing is always with research and discourse is about coming to consensus. Where do we agree and where do we maybe disagree? So this is think by yourself first, share and listen, write down their ideas. Now talk together for about 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Where do your ideas have synergy? And so I did give you the instructions for how to do this, and I gave you the Google form if you would like. It's just a Google Doc. If you'd like to copy it and try it with your students tomorrow, go for it. It's number 9 in the dashboard, but here's what it looks like. And again, it is really about making sure they get that time to think by themselves first, not just turn and talk to your partner. No, think first. Then you pair, then you come to common understanding. And this strategy actually really targets almost all 4 of these things that we've been talking about. And so let's keep going. Think about how you might use this in your classroom as you return to your places. Take a moment, reflect in your mind, jot it down. If you want to chat it in, that's great too. If not, that's okay too. Let's go on. So this one is one of my favorites. It's called Think It, Ink It, Speak It. And it goes with exactly what I've been saying this whole time. Kids need time to think. Then they need time to ink and commit to their thinking before they speak. So for me, this was one of my favorite strategies because I was like, they always need to think first, then they ink it, then they speak it, right? It follows what research says about metacognition and making thinking visible. So the way this one would work is basically the same thing, but I'm going to show you a really cool strategy that goes with it. So this is a Page Keeley probe. It's called Talking About Forces. And again, these are formative assessments. So I would use this at the beginning of instruction, where I'm trying to see and do a temperature check on where my kids are thinking about forces. So again, it's different students, and I'm asking them to agree with one of these students the most. So again, this is a forced choice. They have to pick one of these 5 students that they agree with the most. It doesn't have to be perfect, but what is happening in your mind and who do you agree with most? And then of course they have to explain their thinking. So how do I do this with kids? Well, I would put this up and I'd say, okay, I'd pass out Post-its this time instead of doing the commit and talk on loose leaf paper. I would say, okay, everyone take a Post-it. I want you to write the name of the person you agree with the most And then on the back, explain your thinking. So the name of the person could go on the front or the back. I usually like to have kids put it on the back of the sticky. That way, when I stick them up, nobody can see what they wrote. Because again, it's about low risk. We don't want anyone to walk away feeling like it's too high risk and they can't participate. So on a Post-it, who do you agree with? So let's say I said Ray, and then I would give my reason why. Then me as the teacher, I go around and say, when you're done, just hold up your Post-it. And I come around, I gave them think time, they inked it, but I'm not ready for them to speak yet because it might be too high risk because they're kind of nervous. So what you can do with those Post-its is this. This is called sticky bars, and this is a different example. And the first time you introduce the kids to the probe at the beginning of instruction, you give it one color. So, and then you line them up and make bar graphs as sticky notes. And so what this does before kids share their ideas is it gives them a visual of, oh my gosh, everybody has different ideas in my class. That means my answer might not be wrong. Now I'm feeling okay, like I'm ready to speak it now because I thought about it. I committed on ink, on paper. Now I'm ready to speak. So if you ever, we are doing this in person, just to let you know, we do this example in person. If you ever want to come to ADE, this is one of the ones we are offering in person. I'll show you how this works with kids. And so basically, you as the teacher, the first time you introduce them to the probe, make these amazing bar graphs, and the kids are going to go, oh, I'm not alone. Now I'm ready to talk about my ideas. Fear gone, empowerment raised. So now the kids speak. And then I instruct them, you know, we go through some investigations to try to figure out the forces, and then we take the probe again, midpoint instruction, and you give the kids a different color because part of our new standards is changing your mind over time as you do more learning. Then I instruct them some more based on what the results say. And then the third time I give them the probe, maybe we do more investigations, we gather more data, we construct and revise explanations. I give them a final prompt the third time, and now can you see how their thinking has changed? Great strategy, very visual, formative assessment, discourse, takes away the fear, all those things in one fell swoop. So think about how you can use sticky bars in your classroom. For me, this was my go-to when administrators were coming in for observations. This was my go-to exit ticket, was sticky bars. And then finally, one last strategy that comes at the end of instruction. A lot of these I've been showing you are for engagement at the beginning with phenomena. Well, let's say you've gotten through instruction, you've gathered all this evidence, and now you're asking the kids to make a decision on something. Maybe they're arguing from evidence. Maybe it's engineering and you're asking them to, you know, decide on a model. This is called pro-con pairs, and it is exactly how it sounds. It means we have some good things, we have some bad things, and we're going to talk about them in groups of two, literal strategies. So for this instance, I just picked a topic. A lot of rain is good for people living in the desert. So I would ask the kids to go to their notebooks and assume that the topic is something they've been studying for a while and they've got a lot of evidence to pull from. This topic I'm just using as an example for our case right now. But this comes at the end when kids have lots of evidence to pull from, and they have to decide which side of an argument they are on. So how it works is you give them whatever your thing is that you want them to argue, ask them to find a partner and decide who will be A and B. So a two-person strategy, one is A, one is B. A will be the speaker the entire time because they're going into their notebooks and using all their data to speak. They're going to look for pros and then cons. B's job the entire time is to be the accountability person and the listener who's keeping track of how many positive things and how many negative things the person is saying. So here's how this works. Partner A begins, and in a classroom, I would say, okay, show me who's A. People raise A. Okay, who's B? All right, you got your notebooks, you ready to tally? Okay, Then I would say, I'm going to start the timer. And I had all the kids do it at the same time. 30 seconds, I'd put the timer on. And for 30 seconds, partner A would speak the entire time and just brainstorm. What are the positive things about whatever topic I'm asking them to talk about? B, as A is talking for 30 seconds, just writes down, okay, that's one, that's another one, two, three. They're just kind of keeping track of how many good things about that topic partner A says. Timer goes off, you switch, meaning partner A, remember, is the speaker the whole time. This time switches to the cons and then repeats. How many negative things can the speaker talk about based on the evidence in their notebook? B is keeping track of good versus bad. Then you've got to repeat it because you know the partner A is going to go, wait, I forgot to say that one thing. So you give them another round, 30 seconds more on the positive, 30 seconds more on the negative, and at the end of 2 minutes, B will literally look at the chart and the numbers, they quantified it, and tell A which side of the argument they actually favor in a very quick way based on the number of pros versus cons. And then you would ask them to write an argument based on the evidence. So that's pro-con pairs. Oops. Consider how you might use pro-con pairs in your classroom. Very good for arguing from evidence to get them brainstorming of which side of the argument they are on. And then finally, in your dashboard, I want you to do more learning on your own. So I found these great resources that I included. One, in number 11 in this dashboard, is what we call the Lead Forward Instructional Strategies playlist. This playlist is actually from Texas. So you'll see a lot of Texas standards and TEKS words. That's Texas language for standards. But the best part is they have Discourse playlists. And as you click these are all different kinds, and they come with PowerPoints already ready to go. So all the instructions are on them. So if you like some of these things like pro-con pair, commit and toss, here's a website with many more strategies that you can learn about. Then I gave you the STEM Teaching Tools talk cards, which go with the productive talk moves we talked about. So these are things you can print for the kids, put on the desk, put in your toolkits, however you have resources for kids. And then I did provide this set of, they're called the Doing and Talking Math and Science cards. So it's a set of cards for the teacher, but there's also a set for students that I gave you right here. So I gave you the link to the teacher moves on cards and the student moves. So these are things you can, use. I know some teachers who have printed these, put them on a ring for the kids to kind of sort through. And you could do a billion different things with these. But here's the student versions and then teacher versions. And so we are almost at our time, but I did want to introduce you to one more tool if you are comfortable with having students evaluate themselves and how they engage in discourse. This again comes from Open SciEd. It's an open education resource. You're free to take this and use it. But each of those settings we talked about, partner, small group, whole group, they've got a rubric for self-evaluation on how the student thinks did they adhere to the norms in those different talk formats. So just a great little learning tool, self-reflection. I did provide that for you, number 14. And I just want to leave you with one final thought, because remember, if our goal is to get kids to conceptually understand and gain knowledge, not just memorize vocabulary facts anymore, is they need opportunities to effectively engage in discourse, where the shift is on the kids. The cognitive tasks go to the kids. They do the heavy lifting through talk. That is how we are going to achieve success with our students. So I will stay on. I like to leave a few minutes for questions, but if you need to go, just want to remind you that it takes me a little time to put your attendance in. Once I've marked you completed, it will send you a survey to take. Once you've taken the survey, you can go to your events, click this course, go to completed, and print your own certificate. We do not send them out. And remember, I've put attendance in because I will send you a follow-up email saying thank you, and here's the resource dashboard one more time. So thank you for being here. I'm going to stop the recording.